I will go ahead and I'm going to do a screen share, and I apologize. It sort of looks like I'm in some kind of CIA interrogation room here. After hours, I'm at home. So it's good to see everybody. Some folks I know, some folks I don't. Great to see extension folks on the workshop here. When I talked to Retta and Harrison about what I guess I could contribute to this, I had to weigh that against the background that I have, which, to be very honest, I work primarily with row crops and hay crops, and in my world, drought is sort of an acute problem, set against the backdrop of the chronic problem of irrigated agriculture in the West, which, relatively speaking, could be argued is always in some state of drought, or we wouldn't need irrigation, but that's just a definitional way of looking at it. So what I thought I would do in the limited time I have is take this opportunity to expose folks here to our, what we call the WISE irrigation scheduling tool. And so if you can bear with me here while I just share my screen, as long as I have permission to do that. Okay, it looks like I do. Does everybody see a website that says eRAMS online? Thumbs up, Retta. Okay.
Yes, we do see that.
Yeah, so this is a very simple tool that we developed at CSU that we've sort of improved over the last several years. And some of you already know about this, but this is it's just such a handy website, and it's all free, and it allows you to hopefully build on this year's water management issues and utilize this tool on into the future. So sort of taking the opportunity that we have during drought to fully encourage efficient irrigation scheduling. So I will, I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit, maybe just kind of take advantage of this format and explain that the website of interest for those of you that are taking notes here is this one, www.erams.com. So the RAM being Colorado State. It'll take you to this website here, but if you just go to erams.com and you'll have to set up a login account. If you don't have one, then it'll give you the opportunity to do that. That's one simple step. So you basically just, as I've got up here, my login name is PE Cabot. You can set up a login and it'll take you to this. This is not going to be cluttered for you. You'll just have nothing there. You'll do something as simple as you'll create a project. So these are, I should also add at this website, there's a whole video tutorial on how to do this, but I just kind of want to expose you to this. So you'll create a project, and we'll just call this one Drought Workshop 2. If I can do it, there we go. Drought Workshop 2. And then you're going to want to choose this WISE irrigation scheduler. So what that does is it then opens, and you'll open this workshop here, this project, and it brings you up. It brings up the state of Colorado, and so you'll then type in any address. So it's able to find these addresses pretty much anywhere in the state. And what this is you're interfacing with Google Earth and Surgo and a number of other databases that are available throughout the state. So we'll just go to Hotchkiss, Colorado, because I know that's where Harrison is from. And I noticed Tom Kay's on the call. He's somewhere down sort of off of this area, probably in this zone. But you can zoom in on any of these, any place in the state, and then your goal here would be to locate your field. And again, this is dedicated largely to irrigated producers, but I want to make the comment that the information for water management, may not be as, sophisticated, especially if you're in a dry land system, but it's going to give you some valuable information as to where you might concentrate your resources, particularly water, but possibly fertilizer and other things like that. So let's just say you're interested in the management of any given field, and the steps are really quite easy. So we take this option here that you can draw a circle or draw a polygon. I'll draw a polygon just to make things a little easier. And you'll, we're gonna have to get rid of this. We'll just draw a polygon around any kind of field here. I know this is a pivot, but we'll just for the sake of expediency. It doesn't matter if it's some, strange, field or whatever. You'll get that polygon drawn, field 1. And what this is essentially going to end up as is going to provide you a way to schedule your irrigations against your crop water demands. So once you have this field drawn, you then have these options over here on the side to begin working through the basic elements of a crop water schedule, or a water balance, if you will. Those of you that are familiar with our Coagmet system, what the GPS aspect of this does is it finds the nearest Coagmet station that delivers potential crop water ET. And in this case, the nearest one is Rogers Mesa. If you feel like you want to gain some value out of some other stations, maybe sort of you're in the middle of two places, you might select 2 stations that might have weather conditions comparable to the area you're looking at. Once that's done, you go in, pretty simple here, is you add your crop information to this particular field. So in this case, we might, most of y'all are probably folks that are heavily concerned about drought, might be in like a grass hay situation. We've got a number of different options, and these all correspond to the different crop coefficients that we have in our Coagmet system. So let's just say, for the sake of it, corn. We have an option here. You put in a planting date and you select your plant date. You select your emergence date, maybe 2 weeks later, and then select a harvest date. I'm going to be real careful when I do this, because if I make a mistake, it kind of gives me this weird error, because normally you'd be doing this like during the season. I might have to do, I'm going to set this backwards in time, so I guarantee that I get an actual schedule when it's done. And then I have an example slide that if as a backup, but let's just say, pretend we're, several years ago. Again, I can't, these are not projective tools. They're not going to project what ET is. It's just going to keep pace with your ET for that year. So let's just say you're planting corn sometime in this neighborhood here, something like that. It'll give you an option. It'll default to just that same day, but maybe your emergence is, 2 weeks later. And then you've got maybe a harvest date of, sometime. Again, you pick this for the current year, and then maybe a harvest date somewhere in October. You have this option here to select what kind of irrigation you use. So the least sophisticated irrigation would just be, surface irrigation. And then you can select an efficiency that goes with that form of irrigation, which, for furrow irrigation, you would probably select something low on the end of 50%. If you're, you have a pivot and that your irrigation is more efficient, you might go a little bit higher. And then under a pivot, it's got some other options here. And these are all just basically options to give you sort of a target range for efficiency. And I'll make a point a little bit later about how critical measurement is during these drought periods. So having selected this surface irrigation component, we then have to, this is probably the most detailed part of the program, you have to put in some information about what your current water deficit is. And I'm going to skip over to this slide here that allows me to, again, take advantage of this format. The point I really want to make is these, drought gives us this opportunity to really start improving our water measurements, whether it's soil or irrigation. We're going to live in an ongoing arid climate condition. So during these periods, although everybody here is probably scrambling more so, and maybe this is a little bit more long term, it's still just a critical opportunity to improve our measurement of what we're applying to our fields. So as an example, if you're just whatever, irrigating with siphon tubes, or, even something like open level basin or wild flood irrigation. There's a lot of ways to put in fairly simple measuring devices. And I should make the comment here that anything you put in, if you're really trying to use it to compare against your decree or something along those lines, you really want to make sure that your water commissioner, maybe has some say or gives some insight into what you're installing. But if you're just using this for basic irrigation, water management, then installing a simple system like this will give you essentially a running CFS. So, when you run 24-hour set, how many, you can convert that CFS, cubic feet per second, based on the area of the field. It's a simple calculation to then figure out how many inches of water you apply to your field. So knowing what your input is a critical component of doing a good irrigation water balance. And that'll be relevant here as we go along. Another, some of y'all may be on gated pipe or situations, that have pipe conditions. This is an example of how you might install a flow meter on a gated pipe. This is an example of a flow meter we put on a pivot. And so again, there's a variety of flow meters out there that allow you to understand and keep track of how much water you're actually capable of putting on, so that you can start to fine tune your irrigation rates. But the critical element of all that is the basic flow, whether it's a flume, like an example like this. This is a ramp flume, by the way, or a flow meter, which are two of the most common. When we go, a lot of you are very familiar with this concept of field capacity, wilting point, and depletion. The relatable point here between the ERAMS program and this slide, that again, I think many people are really aware of, I'll just make that bigger so you can see it, is this question that you're getting here. This is important because it's like a checkbook. If you don't know how much money you start with, you don't really know how to do a balance throughout the year. So the program needs you to make an assessment. And if you actually know this number, great. But if it's really dry, you can make some really basic assumptions. It essentially asks for this value called an initial soil water deficit. And what that means is how far down you are below field capacity in the way of a percentage. So in other words, if you're at a wilting point condition in your soil, that is, it's as dry as it could possibly be, you can't even jam a ball probe, into that soil. It's just, you're probably close to 100% at 100% deficit. And maybe after in a drought year like that, it's worth, just using that number. 100% below field capacity. 50% depletion might be if there's a decent moisture level in your soil, but you don't have the you're not going to get this number perfect. So you just you start out with a basic idea, with even like a hand feel method. So once you know that, you put this in 50%. And then it's also, by the way, calling this information from Sergo, which I can show you in a second, it's already giving you the knowledge of what your soils can hold. So that's critical when you're doing a water balance. So I'm kind of scathing over a lot of this, but we've tried to make this pretty easy for folks. So update that. And again, different crops available here. I should also add, within the crop selection here, you've got this, those of you that are really maybe want to get into a little bit more of the science, we have the crop coefficients pegged to the different stages of the crop. So it will actually adjust the field capacity based on what would be the presumed rooting depth of a crop, from its emergence stage to its growth stage. And that is because crop coefficients change throughout the year. So this program accounts for those changing crop conditions. And the reason why that's important is it gives you a little bit more fine-tuned water balance. So at any rate, you say you're done there. So now you have this, field that's got this information, and, we would encourage people to, you know, put this information for all their fields. And then you've got it's kind of interesting. You can look underneath, and this is where it's getting that information from your soils. So it's going to kind of develop a water balance based on like the weighted area of these different soils, which really don't have, in this case, two tremendously different properties. And so once that's done, you're going to retrieve this thing called an irrigation schedule, and it's pulling this from, in this case, it's pulling this from 2019. I don't want to let this, it could be my wireless connection at home, but I'll let this kind of crank for a second here. There you go. So this is not, this essentially shows a 2019 irrigation condition. It looks really bad. What it basically describes is that at the point of your harvest date, you know, well, I think we gave it something in that neighborhood. You know, we haven't input any data, so it obviously indicates that the soil is 100% dry. So what you would do to adjust this is you now have the ability to go into this table here, and you can start adding rainfall dates that might, you know, be a little bit more accurate. Rainfall amounts might be a little bit more accurate. But you can also add in any this is where the critical point for your drought management is to do this, is you can add in how many inches of water you actually applied to that field. So again, you know how much water you are measuring, you do that conversion to get your inches of water, and let's say, you know, you irrigate, you know, maybe right after you plant or something like that, and you know, maybe you put in 5 inches of water, and then, you know, maybe you go 2 weeks later or something like that, and you put on. Now, again, these have to be, the more accurate your irrigation system can measure, the more accurate you can input. It's going to take that number and then apply that efficiency to your, it's going to cut this in half basically. So let's just say, you know, you're just tracking your irrigation, and we'll hit update. And I just wanted to add, I'll show you a little bit more detailed slide, but this gives you I just wanted to show you how you can pretty easily add. It's essentially a good way of tracking. So like, even if you're in like an EQIP program or something like that, and you need to demonstrate that you're adhering to your EQIP requirements, you could certainly submit something like this. And I'm not going to let it wait too long. Okay, so then you have this graph here that it gives you. And this is where the kind of, I didn't, these irrigations were probably not there. I didn't put them in the right place, but what you're looking at here, and I don't want to mouse around too much and make you dizzy, but you're looking at a graph that shows you the relevant information of the soil water balance. And so what it's tracking, you see these little green lines, it's tracking your precipitation. So every time there's the Coagmet station records a precip event, it's got an opportunity to fill some water in your soil. It's tracking your available water capacity, or it's assuming your soil available water capacity based on the changing root zone of the crop. So your bigger root zone as your water management regime changes through the year, you would assume a deeper root zone, so your holding capacity, effectively the volume you're trying to manage, gets larger. So it allows that water capacity to get bigger as you sort of approach a steady growth stage. And then it's got this plant available water. And so what that number, that's a really important part of this graph, because what it's doing is that absent any irrigation, this number is going to continue to just decline and decline and decline and decline. And that's the reason why. It's because the plant is mining the water out of your soils. And then an option that we had earlier is this is just a management option. It gives you the ability to assume a plant available water at depletion rate. So this gets it's a little easier to understand if you look at a graph that would be something that you'd probably you'd get during the course of the season. And what the program is intended to deliver to you is this graph, and I'm going to make it a little bigger because I'm just not so sure how well people can see it. What this shows you is, this is again that blue, it's a little fuzzy to see there, but this is your plant available water being consumed by the plant. So the goal is to kind of keep that plant available water as close to your field capacity as possible without letting it go below this red line. So absent any other inputs, like you don't water, you don't get any rain, it's just going to continue to just drop and drop. Anytime there's a little blip up, it's because you got a rainfall event, so it added a little water. And then anytime you irrigate, you're bringing that water level up to field capacity. If you go beyond it, then you're just basically, running water off the field. And so what it'll do is it'll just continue to allow you to track your irrigations and monitor how far you are below field capacity but above your depletion rate. And so the idea would be that during like a reproductive stage or a critical growth stage of your plant or your field, you're trying to make sure you're watching this line, and when it starts to get down below the red, that's your trigger to say, okay, I need to start getting concerned. So I think what I want to leave you with here is this idea that if you're not able to irrigate, that is, you're a dry land producer, you can still use this tool. It's going to give you an idea of how deprived your soils are of water, and I suppose the actionable decision you might make based on that depriving or that deficit would be whether that field goes into some kind of a like irrigation or not irrigation abandonment, but some other condition that would justify no longer managing that field for this year. Retta and these folks are the drought, the rangeland folks. So again, this is primarily an irrigation tool, but it can be used to monitor your soil water deficit in a dry land situation. I would let Retta weigh in on where that information would be relevant to dry land folks. So I guess then the last point, just to kind of sum up, is these important considerations being, I think it's really critical in a year like this to invest in simple measuring devices so that you can possibly look at, if you're trying to like get around all your fields, you got a limited amount of water, you're on percentage or something like that. If you know how much water you have available to you and you can measure that, you can make a decision to move more quickly to another field position to sort of maximize the use of your water right. If you can't even keep your soil above that depletion level, maybe you have some idea of how far below you are. So the idea is to constantly try to track your crop water use throughout the season. And the good news is some of these programs are really designed to give like potential water use. So you do have there's a little bit of conservativeness in there that your crop probably can withstand a little bit more stress than our program would suggest it can. So you got a little wiggle room in there. There's a couple good fact sheets. I'll leave this to Retta to, however we circulate the notes on this. But one of the best fact sheets, if you don't even have a measuring device out there, I would highly recommend you going out and digging up this fact sheet on measuring water flow in surface irrigation ditches and gated pipe. And so this is a way of doing these measurements without even putting in a meter. So in other words, if you have gated pipe, and you have a little bit, you can make a little assessment of what the head is on the pipe and what kind of gates you have. You can actually just count up the number of gates and you can get you can make a reasonably good assessment or estimate of how much water you're applying. It's also got, and this is like getting really old school here, for different siphon tubes, what kind of flow rates you can expect with siphon tubes, which might be more the case with like wild flood irrigation. So you can get a decent idea of how much water you apply if you've got some of these basic ideas. Yeah, I mean, measurement is just, like I said, it's a critical aspect of this. And then I highly recommend anybody to get, these professional lab, get their soils tested. So again, critical elements of a water balance is, and you can dig up lots of information on this. If you read it and then know how to get a hold of me, I'm happy to go into more detail on this. Just a little nuts and bolts. I feel obligated to mention this, even though it might not make too much sense now. Most labs will give these values in a unit that we call gravimetric, which is grams of water per gram of soil. And so you really do need to get a bulk density value done so that you can actually convert that to a volumetric water content, which is the only way you'll be able to really utilize that data for irrigation water management. And then the last thing I would say is that if you, my little props here, if you don't really want to do any of that at all, there's a simple device here called an atmometer. And what this is it's essentially you have a little reservoir of water you put in here, and this little porcelain cap here allows water to escape from it to kind of mimic the irrigation rate of alfalfa. And if you look real close, there's a little stilling well on the side. So every day, this little stilling well is going to show a drop. And by drop, I mean just a reduction in the water. And by that amount, you can get a decent assessment of how much the weather would be driving alfalfa to consume at your place, and then get an idea of how much you need to backfill, or in terms of irrigation, or you can just see how far behind you are, again, if that gives you any kind of actionable decision making in a dry land scenario. So I don't want to go on too much longer, Retta. That's about what I had. I'll go ahead and stop my share, and then
Thank you, Barry.
I'm happy to stick around for questions later. And I want to really emphasize, if you give me a ring, set up a time, I'm really happy to go through all this in a lot more detail with a smaller group if it's easier. It's a lot to throw at you at once, but those little boxes, if you just have a question, I'm happy to help answer them.
Perry, would you mind throwing your email in the chat?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I absolutely will. I can even I'll put my cell phone number in there, and I would just say text me first, because like everybody, I'm not in my office a lot, so just
you can always smoke signal, Perry, too. I find that works out well on a clear day.
Yeah, that's work.
So folks, if you haven't used Zoom a lot, there is a chat feature available at the bottom of your screen. There's a little call out button that says chat. So if you have a question for for Perry, put it in the chat. And there was one question, Perry, that I think Greg took care of. So Greg, thanks for doing that. Really appreciate that. While you all are coming up with your questions for Perry, if you have them, I'm going to launch a poll. So on your screen, you're going to see a question come up that says right now, what is your primary occupation? And note that this poll is multiple choice, which means if one or more of these answers applies to you, you can check them all. So if you're a landowner and also a student, or if you're a rancher and a landowner, or an educator, put all those things that apply to you. I'm just trying to get some demographic information here and what our population looks like today. So it looks like about half of you have weighed in on this. Give you just another couple of seconds, give you about 10 more seconds. And I'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So there, if you look, it looks like we've got lots of people involved in agriculture, and looks like nearly half of our crowd are landowners as well. So certainly these are items that are important to you that we're discussing tonight. Appreciate all of you that are here tonight and looking at this. Retta, were you able to capture that?
Yes, I was. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I've got one more question that I'm going to ask you all. So if you look to your screen here again, and looks like in the chat, Perry, I don't know if you see that, if you can be thinking about that while launch the second poll. My second poll I'm going to ask you this evening are, what are some of the drought impacts you are dealing with? Now, bear in mind that 2020 was hot and dry summer, so you are experiencing some of these already. You might experience more in 2021. So if you want to say what you think you might be dealing with as well, lots of options there. So take just a moment to look those over. And again, multiple choice, so feel free to click on all that apply. I'll let this one go just a little bit longer, given the length of it. Again, if you haven't opened the chat, do so you can keep track of the questions that Perry's being asked, some of his answers he's putting in there, and that conversation can go on through the next presentation. Bear in mind too that some of those links to including that good fact sheet from Arizona State University are linked in the chat. So I'll close this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So certainly, and Perry, so how appropriate is your talk that nearly 3/4 of the folks are experiencing reduced irrigation water, of course, reduced forage. This doesn't surprise me that most people are, by virtue of what they've answered here, experiencing multiple effects of drought.
I can quickly add, Todd, is that again, if you're a hay grower, the program does have a really convenient way of adding different cuttings. So you can actually track that in the program, and I didn't want to get into that because I was afraid it would give me fits without, again, it's, you know, for 2021, we're just getting into it, but you can use, and what it will do is it'll actually reduce your crop water demand based on an after cutting where, you know, your crop water demand is a little lower and then the plants start to grow. So again, just another way of doing some record keeping. I'm happy to do a, you know, individual time if you guys, anybody wants to set something more detailed up.
Well, we really appreciate your time here tonight, Perry. Great information. I'd encourage folks to go on to that eRAMS. You're not going to break it, so go play around, learn about it, visit with Perry. And Perry, thanks also for offering for our participants to visit with you later. And I'll turn it back over to you, Harrison.
Thanks so much,
hang
Todd.
around.
So we have a question about how to access tonight's presentation. I think we'll send you a link. Great, thanks, Retta. We are also, just to note, we are gonna turn the recording off after our presentations, just so that if you feel like saying something that you don't want recorded, don't worry, we're gonna turn the recording off at the end of the presentations before we start the networking time. So, with that, we're going to move on to Celene Hawkins, who I'm very excited to present to you. She, like I mentioned in her bio, has a background in water law and now works in a number of different capacities from a policy point of view around water. So Celene, you're up.
Well, thanks, Harrison. And Perry's a bit of a hard act to follow. So I do need to start my presentation by being perfectly clear. I'm trained as an attorney. I've worked as a water attorney in Colorado, mostly in Divisions 4 and 7, but I'm not currently a practicing attorney, which means I can't give you legal advice or be your water attorney. But what it does mean is I can give you some information about how attorneys think about water issues, and also sort of when it's a really good time to think about reaching out to your own water attorney. So having been out of the legal practice for a few years now and actually doing projects on the ground, I have a little bit of clarity that lawyers spend most of their time thinking about risk. And water lawyers spend most of their time thinking about whether their clients' water rights are being exposed to risk. It tends to be whether there's you know, any risk of abandonment. But what I want to talk a little bit more about tonight is risks to sort of the measure of the water right. So if you talk to any water attorney, one of the first things they're probably going to tell you is that the measure of your water right is not necessarily the number that's in your decree that you're allowed to divert from a river, the measure of the water right is what's called your historic consumptive use, which, you know, in layman's terms is sort of the average consumptive use that your water right has over a period of record. And if you ever want to change your water rights or sort of change uses and you need to go to water court, it's that historic consumptive use component of your water right that really dictates the value of the water right. So attorneys spend a lot of time thinking about making sure that their clients' water rights are protected, and should they ever need to change it or do something different, that their historic consumptive use continues in the way that they want. So I think that when you're thinking about your operations in drought years, one of the questions is, you know, are you gonna make some changes in how you're using your water? And for, you know, an attorney to think about it, I'm a little less concerned about the actions that Perry was talking about with just making really wise use of your water right, because irrigating at exactly the right time is going to maintain the consumptive use of your water right in most cases. In some cases, it actually increases it because you're getting water right in the field where it needs to be consumed and it's not running off through return flows. Some of the things that, you know, I flag as, whoa, talk to your water attorney, changing your point of diversion, putting water on a field that you haven't put water on before, it may not be in your decree. Stopping using your water right for a long time. This gets really tricky in drought if you can't get a cutting or a crop in because you're not in priority. You know, it's not necessarily going to count against you if you're not in priority, but what if you were in priority for a while but you couldn't get enough water to put a crop in? That gets to be a pretty complicated question. And again, the thing that I think about a lot, or that attorneys would think about a lot, is, you know, whether you're making changes in response to drought that make a lot of sense right now, but that might sort of come up in the future and harm your water right or put your water rights at risk. So what does this mean? I mean, it's never fun to have to go and pay your water attorney in a year that you're also suffering with drought and managing a lot of other things. So I think the best recommendation I can make is that before and during the drought years, it's, you know, one thing you could consider doing is reviewing your water rights portfolio. The portfolio for any given ranch, farm, operation looks different. You could have a direct diversion right with your own structure, which has its own sort of set of issues. You could have shares in a big mutual ditch company where there are lots of folks working for the ditch company, making sure those water rights in order. And the big question is sort of whether you're working within the bylaws and the rules for that ditch company. It's totally different if you're getting federal storage project water that's delivered through a canal under a contract. Those are all really different scenarios. And some operations have a mix of all those water rights. So sort of knowing what your water rights portfolio is like, and also knowing where there's flexibility and where there isn't flexibility. That can help you make really good decisions in those sort of pressure times of drought years. You can say, oh, I know I can't divert my entire water right at one ditch because it's not all decreed there, but I know that, you know, I could do other things that are more flexible. So I thought it might be helpful to give you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about, sort of when, you know, there might be an administrative approval to seek if you want to do something more flexible, and then give you some examples of things that I've seen where, you know, there's enough flexibility that folks were able to just work through some issues, to give you a sense of what you might hear or might consider. So I work for the Nature Conservancy. We own land throughout the state of Colorado, and we own a preserve on the San Miguel River near Nucla, Colorado. And we were approached by some of our neighbors near Uravan that were trying to get the ball fields campground a little more shade, and they were wanting to plant some cottonwoods, but worried that they didn't have a water right, so that if things got really low and the river was under administration, that they might not be able to divert enough water to keep the cottonwoods wet once they were planted. So as the Nature Conservancy, we were perfectly happy to share some of our water and lend it for that project, but we had to go through a process of sort of evaluating what that might mean for our water rights. So this is an example that water would not be diverted at its decreed point of diversion. It would be diverted on the neighboring property. So what we ended up doing is filing for an approval through the state engineer's office to do that. In this particular case, it was called a substitute water supply plan. So we had to go through, we had to do some engineering work and run it through a state engineer approval process. We worked with our water commissioner. It was, you know, there's some work involved in these things, but what it means is that we could share water rights with our neighbor to let their cottonwood planting happening without putting our water rights at risk at doing that. So I thought that might be a helpful example of sort of when you need to get an approval or a tool. And then I have some examples of where I've seen people flexibly managing water in ways that really, you know, didn't have a big water rights component to it. So I have talked to folks from big ditch companies that when things get tight, they start to rotate days on when they're taking water. They work it out internally within their ditch system so that no one gets shut off, and they start sort of rotating the days that they're all taking waters in their shares. I've also seen in drought conditions where neighbors on a river get together and talk, and they sort of hold off a few days before they make a call on the river that would put everybody under administration, and to sort of see if the monsoonal storm that came in could keep that river from going on call, which would sort of drastically change people being in and out of priority. So there are times when you can do things with a handshake. There are times where you can do things with a handshake, but you might be exposing your water rights, and talking to your water attorney and reviewing your water rights portfolio can sort of help you assess what your particular situation is, where you have flexibility, and where you might either need protection or there's things that you may not want to do because they're going to risk your water rights. So I know that we're running a little behind. That was sort of the main points that I brought here tonight. Happy to take questions, and I know I don't have a cool tool to test out, so there may not be as many for me.
I will
Celene,
remind oh, sorry, Harrison, you go ahead.
Oh, Celene, I was going to ask you, where do you see the most conflict happening in a drought year? Is it between producers? Is it between, you know, producers on a single water right? Where do you see the greatest controversy rising on a drought year?
I think it's really stressful everywhere. You know, in my basin here in the southwestern part of the state, one of the things that I see is that in the first year of drought, if folks have access to storage water, we have a bunch of federal storage projects sitting in our basins. Usually people get sort of nervous, but they can ride it out if they can access the storage water. When we're rolling into the second year of drought and we're not sure we can fully fill those storage reservoirs, then I feel like the stress gets evened out. I think that, you know, across the board, it doesn't matter whether you're in a ditch company, if you're getting storage water, if the water isn't there, it's stressful and it's hard to plan too, so.
Great. Thank you very much, Celene. Todd, over to you.
I was just going to remind folks to use that chat feature. I did get a chat or two from people who said, I didn't know that existed. So again, if you haven't found the chat feature, it is in the bottom of your Zoom. So if you have any questions for Celene, go ahead and put those in. In the meantime, Harrison, I guess if we don't have any other questions, I'll let you do the introduction of the next speaker.
Great. And I did not have her bio pulled up at first, but now I do. Retta has a Master's of Science in Rangeland Science and Management. Prior to working for CSU Extension, she worked as the Outreach and Research Coordinator on the Learning from the Lands project out of CSU's Warner College of Natural Resources. Retta has also worked on multiple interdisciplinary teams conducting rangeland research and outreach in Colorado, Arizona, and Mongolia, which is, I think, in Utah. Without further ado, I turn it over to one of my favorite people, Retta Brugger.
And Harrison didn't mention that Retta's also just the coolest. That's really her title, Range Management Specialist and the coolest. And while Retta's bringing her screen up here, I'm going to ask you all to share another poll with me. And that is, do you have a drought plan for your operation? Before Retta starts, we'd like to just get a feel for where you all are. So this is a single choice. So you have a written drought plan that you've used. You have a drought plan, but you've never had to use it. You have the plan in your head. And then, of course, last, what's the plan? So go ahead and hit your choice there. I'm going to close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Well, Retta, I'm sure this doesn't surprise you.
Todd, I'm going to step in for just a second and plug. So what we didn't mention at the top was what this Drought Advisors program is. And I think this poll is a great opportunity to illuminate this new research or this new program area that we're working on. So Drought Advisors really is an opportunity for producers to meet with our team and talk about what their biggest risks are when it comes to drought. And through our team, we are going to help work through sort of what are the priority areas for you. This is obviously stuff you maybe already know. Maybe it's stuff you're still trying to figure out what's the priority. Where do I attack this? From what angle do I attack this? And, you know, our team's really there to be discussion partners with you. And then once we talk about and decide sort of what are those primary areas of risk or concern, we work on finding, pre-vetting and connecting you with the right technical professionals that can continue workshopping sort of the next steps that might actually take that plan out of your head and get it on paper or get it in action. So we will we'll post a link to the email address that you can email us at, and we are open for business to work with you and try to help identify the most direct route towards executing a drought plan and reducing risk. And without further ado, now over to Retta. Sorry, Retta, for that.
No worries. All right. So can you see my screen? And are my slides moving? Oops. Okay, they're moving, correct?
Nope. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you for the very kind introductions, and I liked my alternative bio in which, what was I, a ship painter? That sounds fun. So maybe the next, after the drought, I'll take that up. But I'm going to be speaking tonight about elements of a drought plan, and a lot of this literature comes from range science / ranch management. But I think that, in light of some of the stressors that you all have identified in the polls and that we're all experiencing in the southwestern part of the United States, I think that some of these elements, these fundamental building blocks of a drought plan, might have some broader relevance to different types of agriculture. So with that, what do we know about drought? We know that drought is bad, right? Water good. This is kind of a spoof article that I find funny. It says, Kansas City, Missouri, sources nationwide are confirming this week that the current drought is bad and that water is very good. We don't like the drought. Local farmer Dan Rickey told reporters, we like water. So sometimes when I talk about drought, this is a little bit what I feel like, like we all know drought is bad and experts maybe don't have any more information. But I think that this also highlights, where our area of agency is with drought. We can't make drought stop. We can't make it go away, but we can change how it impacts us and impacts our operations. So that's really the space in which a plan operates, right? You're making a plan to change how the drought impacts your operation and create resilience to drought. So I mentioned range management and the ranch management literature. Range management and production that depends on rainfall and snowfall, like cattle who are raised on native rangelands, we're very vulnerable to fluctuations in drought year to year. So these are data and photos from the Central Plains Experimental Range, which is about 70 miles northeast of Denver, where they've been collecting data since the 1930s on a range of different issues. But you can see the volatility that we all experience in some form if you live in the Western United States, where 2002 rangelands produced 200 pounds per acre on average, and then that increased by 6 times in 2003 to 1,300 pounds per acre, and then halved in 2004 to about 700, and then doubled again about in 2005. So this is extreme volatility, and I think this is the reason that there are so many resources in terms of drought planning that come from ranch management and from range management. If we think about irrigated systems, which I actually don't know that much about because I exclusively work on rangelands, you might say, well, the drought plan is irrigation. Perry alluded to this. When we're dealing with an arid part of the world, we compensate for that aridity through irrigation. But of course, with the potentially diminished supplies and low amounts of water this year, it may call for more action in terms of planning what a deficit might mean for your operation. So with that, I'm going to go through pretty quickly what are the basic building blocks of a drought contingency plan. Now, of course, I'm going to make this more simple than it actually is, but it's 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night and we're all a little tired, so I'll try to make it as simple as I can. When I think about a drought contingency plan, I think we can break it down to 2 words. And these words are if and then. If we experience dry conditions, if we experience low flows, whatever it is, then some action is taken. This is just very fundamental what a drought plan is. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper. So in the drought planning literature, of course, there's some other words associated with the if and the then. And the if, I would say, is closely related to this idea of triggers, which are essentially decision points that prompt a specific decision within a drought plan. And then the then, that's associated with strategies. How do you implement management actions in response to that if, in order to reach your operational goals and to continue managing through the drought? So I'm going to dive in now into the if part, which is the trigger part, right? So as I said, a trigger is a point at which monitoring information prompts a very specific decision within a drought plan. This can be a range of things, and you may have things that you use within your operation or things that you observe. So, but in the range world, this could be things like precipitation amount, the timing of precipitation, range conditions. It could be that information combined with projected cattle prices, but basically it's outside information that can prompt you to make an assessment of the conditions and then prompt you to actually take action. So an example of a trigger. Again, well, I'll be referencing Nebraska, I think more than once during this presentation, and that's because Nebraska has the Drought Mitigation Center, and the University of Nebraska at Lincoln has done quite a bit of work with drought planning. But this is an example, I think, in terms of the ecology, it doesn't really apply to our situation here in Colorado, but I think it's a good example of how they formulated what a drought trigger is. So they got this first part, the if they know that about half the annual forage is produced by June 15th, and they know that about 75% of the annual average rainfall is received between November 1st and June 15th, then they connect it to a management decision. In their case, they have decided if it's less than 80% of that 75% that they should receive during that period, they'll decrease their stocking 30% by weight. Now again, not necessarily applicable, and looking out in 2021, this particular example wouldn't give us that much early warning. It wouldn't give us early action, right? But it's an example of how they tie conditions to management action. So now, if people don't mind, if you can use your chat, I would be interested to hear if anyone on this call has a drought trigger that they use or they rely upon, or an observation that they make of landscapes and areas where they manage. So go ahead and put that into the chat if you have it. Some things I've heard through talking to folks in the western part of Colorado are things like people pay attention to runoff amounts early on in the spring as a predictor of range condition. There's other folks who look at fall moisture the previous fall to see how that goes. And if it is really dry conditions, then they know that they have reduced moisture going into the spring. So there's a variety of things that people look at. All right, so we have someone looking at snowfall. We got someone looks at the snow tell sites, which are closely tied to stream flow. All right. Soil moisture. Nice. Eastern Plains, snow by April. Great. Yeah, and the Eastern Plains are super interesting. I don't have a ton of experience, but cool to see someone on the call from the Eastern Plains. All right. So I think the key here is there's a variety of things that you can be watching, and they're context dependent. There's no silver bullet for what a good trigger would be, but the key is that it prompts early action and it's outside information that you can observe. Todd looks at Nidus. How badly the ditch company annual meeting goes. Yes, that's one way too. So some things I'm watching this year as we go into 2021. Nobody needed to see this map again, right? But a couple things I'm looking at from a range management perspective. So past observations, this past year was really dry. We had a really dry fall. I'm based in Grand Junction, so it was very, very dry, historically dry, obviously. So we know that's where we are. We know low soil moisture. We know that grasses, which are the main forage crop on rangelands, are not in good shape. They didn't really have a chance to grow that much last year. And so they didn't expand out their root systems, and they're potentially vulnerable going into the spring. So that's where we are. And then if I couple that with the outlook, which is a forecast, this is a product that comes out monthly from NOAA. They forecast out 3 months, and yeah, every month it comes out, and things aren't looking great for us. My understanding is we do lose resolution on the forecasts as we go into the spring. In our part of the world, we're better at forecasting winter months versus summer months. So this probably could change, or we just don't know what's going to happen later in the spring and early summer. But for right now, we are set up for some start conditions and some vulnerabilities from a range perspective. So this is something I would be watching. So last point on the trigger concept. This is a quote from the Welch Ranch, which is in southern Colorado, and they did a lot of work with UNL, University of Nebraska at Lincoln. And I thought this quote was really good. They write, "You've got to say, what are my current conditions? And with the amount of grass I've got, what can I run?" And I think that's a mindset that's important because, like I say, every time you get a little shower during a drought, that gives you false hope if you're not careful. So I think the key point with the triggers is that they are outside information that you can look at and gives you early warning about your conditions rather than being in this hope cycle and not taking action. So that's the if part of the drought plan, triggers. What prompts a decision? What are you watching to prompt management actions? And of course, if and then, what are those management actions? Before I get there, I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about goals, because of course, goals that you have are fundamental to any strategy you might pick as a management strategy for dealing with drought. When I think about, what goals are, the word that comes to mind for me is legacy. The legacy that you want to create with your operation, perhaps as a business person, perhaps as a land steward, perhaps as a family and community member. So the choices that you make in drought need to be relative to what you're trying to accomplish more broadly. Drought, of course, is a situation where there's scarcity inherently. And so because of that, not all choices are open, right? You can't choose everything. You can't maximize everything. You have to pick. So I think having a good idea of where you want to head as an operation can help you parse out what are the best strategies, especially when you do have to prioritize. So a goal can look like a lot of different things, and it's very operationally dependent. But I threw in a couple examples. It could be, stay financially viable in drought while protecting land health. I just made that up. And you could potentially think about breaking that down more. Maybe it's covering the operating loan in drought without outside income, or maybe it's leveraging outside income to avoid debt, or maybe it's destocking strategically if you're a livestock operation. But all of these things are important to consider in terms of, the old expression goes, if you have no idea where you're going, right, it doesn't really matter what you do, but if you have no idea where you're going, then you're probably not going to get to a specific spot that you want to go. So you need to define that destination. So we've talked about if, right, that's the trigger concept. We've talked about how goals underlie and underscore every part of this. And so then I'll talk very briefly about the then. What are the management strategies and what does that look like in the context of a drought plan? So again, the then is highly dependent on your operation type, right? So culling is a really big part of the strategies involved in range management and ranch management, but it might be, Perry brought up irrigation scheduling and watering according to agronomic need a little more efficiently. It might be investing in infrastructure, or maybe it's creating a wildfire evacuation plan, because we do know that with these dry conditions, we are possibly going to experience another challenging fire season. So I think that the then can really be dependent on your goals, but I think it also relates to what is possible now and what's an area where you actually could take action in the next couple of months to make yourself more resilient. One other thing to mention there is, of course, there's things that we can do tomorrow, we can do things in the next couple of months to increase resilience to drought, but there's a whole range of things that likely we can't do, right? Or you can't do because they're a longer term investment or a longer term strategy. But I guess I would encourage folks, if you are able to, use the challenge of this year to think about how you might begin to build towards those longer term solutions or longer term developments that could increase your resilience overall to drought, even if they're not going to necessarily help you this particular year. So wrapping up here, I like this sort of hoping for rain is not a drought strategy, right? I know that maybe somebody else knows someone like me, but during the Pine Gulch fire this summer, which was outside of Grand Junction, I was kind of just hoping for rain. That was my strategy for dealing with the fire. But, and there's a time and a place to do that. I just kept hitting refresh on my web browser to see if we'd get any rain or if the fire would stop. But I think when it comes to operations and to drought plans, we need to take it out of the hoping and into the strategy. And a drought plan can help with this because it can prompt one to take early action. It can prompt you to act based on your observations rather than what you hope might happen in the future. And so in that way, I think it can help you control what you can actually control. Again, we're not trying to control the drought. We can't really do that, but we can control how operations might experience drought. And finally, it can help you protect your legacy by prioritizing what is really important to you in your operation, and prioritizing actions that really contribute to that long term. So additional resources, I'll put these in the chat. There's a ton of resources to assess weather and climate data. Sometimes there's possibly too many, but there's a lot of resources. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them already. If you are interested in making a drought plan and you don't have one already, again, as Harrison said, we do have the Drought Advisors program, and you're welcome to contact us, and then we'll work with you on some specific individuals who might have the right kind of expertise to help you out. We also have the CSU Drought Extension page, and I can't say enough good things about the work that University of Nebraska-Lincoln has done on the drought planning manuals. They are for range management and ranch management, so they're not as focused on crops, but there might be some concepts, like the concepts I've shared today, that could be relevant to folks who are managing different types of agricultural operations. So finally, wanted to end with this sentiment. A couple weeks ago, I wrote a paper with a researcher from the ARS on the role of El Nino and La Nina in essentially the dryness that we see currently. And a rancher I work with saw it and said, you know, Retta, I don't need another reminder that it's dry out. And I said, yes, well, I'm sorry about that, you know, true statement. But then he kind of interrupted me and said, but it's a good reminder that I need to act. So I think that's the sentiment I'd like to leave you with tonight. I'm sure that none of you need another reminder that it's really dry out, but I do encourage you to take action in some small way or maybe in a large way to cope a little bit with these conditions that we're likely to see in 2021. So with that, I can take some questions, and Todd, if you don't mind launching the poll, that'd be great.
You bet, Retta. Did we want to ask about the opportunities? Is that what you wanted to ask about?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So this is a great one because, Retta, we don't want to end depressed, right? So have you ever had an unexpected opportunity because of a drought? So this is a single answer, yes or no. Maybe an opportunity to change some herd genetics, or force yourself to look into a different lease that you hadn't looked into before, or reconsider something. Looks like those results are coming in. Give about 10 more seconds. So I'll close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Well, there is a silver lining, Retta.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting to hear. And I think I've heard that before. We did a workshop, maybe some of you were at it, but we did a workshop in 2018 in Durango. And someone actually came up to me afterwards and said that I hadn't asked about any of the opportunities in drought. So he wanted to let me know what those were. And it was, for him, it was a herd genetics opportunity. So thanks for launching that.
Absolutely.
So I think, Retta, are we moving on to the balance of the networking section, or should we open it up for questions?
I think we could potentially network and question at the same time.
Okay, great. We're going to begin our networking session, and we've got some prompted questions for you, but feel free to politely interrupt and ask your questions as well. Also, you can, if you don't feel like asking a question out loud, please, or putting an answer out loud, please feel free to put your question in the chat. But we also do want to hear from some of y'all and hear some voices from producers around the state and beyond the state. It sounds like we've got some folks. Retta, I'm going to ask you to please turn the recording off for this.
Harrison, before we do that, can I ask the last poll question so we can capture that data?
Sure.
And I hate to do this, but only because people might be leaving us as well, and we would like to know how you found out about this webinar, so we know how we can effectively reach out to you again. So before we stop the recording and get too heavy into our discussion this evening, you can just let us know. And again, multiple choice. So if more than one of these applies to you, please check all that apply. Okay.
Great.
We'll close that in about 10 seconds. We'll close that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Thank you all. We need to capture that data. Harrison, I'm going to take a quick photo of that, and then if you want to turn off the recording, we can do so.
Great. Nice job, CSU. Broad shoulders y'all have.